Ik zie ook niet.
Marion, I still don't seem to have control yet.
Shane, perhaps you can ask me again.
This says give up remote control, which I have. Now I will request it again. Okay, let's see. It's not letting me control it still. Oh, here we go.
Shane, can you go to the second slide now
Yeah. Okay.
and start? Because it's 1 o'clock. Thank you.
It's not letting me.
Will you say then next slide, please? So I will do it for
Okay.
you.
Yeah, next slide. Go to next. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FIP digital event today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good late night, wherever you are around the world. We know there's people registered from all over. We're delighted to be with you here today. Our program today is pharmacy building a sustainable future for health, or rather, this is, let me introduce to you first a few words about some announcements. Let me remind everyone of the FIP World Congress in Brisbane in 2023, later this fall. We will have, I've been hearing much about this program for the last few months, and I know that there are just a tremendous wealth of incredible programs. This meeting has been planned for a long time. We're really looking forward to having this meeting and hopefully seeing some of you, maybe many of you there. Another announcement, let me talk about the Pharmacy Education Journal. It is FIP's education journal. I can tell you from my own experiences that the journal has always been fantastic, but has done very much the last few years to even further enhance its visibility and its reputation. It is publishing some excellent papers on workforce and other issues throughout the world that is really making a difference in terms of labor force planning, standardization of education around the world, and you should really give it a look. Next slide. Which leads us into a quick introduction and to something that we have going on here that some of the persons your panelists have are dealing with currently. And Pharmacy Education Journal is one of the Granada journals. This is a group that started out with 10, is now 15 journals and growing. The Granada Statements are a series of recommendations to improve the visibility and quality of publications in pharmacy practice. The Granada Statements include 18 recommendations gathered into 6 topics, which I'll mention in just a second. You'll notice a QR code. If you are able to take a picture of that QR code, it will actually take you to the Granada Statements. The Granada Statements deal with appropriate use of terminology in publishing, impactful abstracts, peer reviews, journal scattering, using metrics like impact factor wisely, and selecting the most appropriate pharmacy practice journal. You'll see the recommendations here aimed at improving the research and improving the visibility really of the entire profession It is FIP supported. And we encourage you to take a look at the Granada Statements. Next. So let me introduce to you our program today, Motivating Language, Special Considerations for Mentoring Among Diverse Groups of Colleagues. Some of you who attended our first session might know that this is the second of 4 digital events dedicated exclusively to mentoring. I'm really excited about it. In the first program, we gave an overview of mentoring. We talked about some of the pitfalls that are common in mentoring programs. We talked about some of the best practices that are inherent in mentoring programs. So we took an overall view that took into account all the participants, including organizations, the mentors, and the mentees. In the second of these 4 programs, we're looking at specifically relationships between mentors and mentees. And in that regard, we have specialists from within and outside of pharmacy today who have both a tremendous amount of experience, as well as some research that's been done on mentoring, as well as communication specialists who are actually going to talk about the use of motivating language to help us endear ourselves to our peers. I'm today's moderator. My name is Shane Deselle. I am a professor of pharmacy at Touro University, California, in Vallejo, California, about an hour away from San Francisco. I am professor and associate dean for research and professional affairs there. I'm also the founding editor of the journals Research and Social Administrative Pharmacy, which I think many of you are probably familiar with, and the somewhat newer, the last couple of years, Exploratory Research in Clinical and Social Pharmacy. I'm a Fulbright Specialist Scholar, having spent a time in Pristina, Kosovo a few years ago. I'm on the roster again and looking to head to another country in the next coming months. I actually conduct research on mentoring programs itself, as well as on the pharmacy workforce and organizational culture in various settings in pharmacy. I co-edit one of the larger textbooks in pharmacy, the Contemporary Research Methods in Pharmacy and Health Services, as well as a management textbook that is used in pharmacy programs around the world. And it wasn't long ago that, just a couple of years ago, that I shared something called the Wiederholt Award for the best paper in the Journal of the American Pharmacists Association. Next. And I will also introduce to you the rest of our distinguished panel as each person's turn comes along. Be reminded that this webinar is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. The recording will be available on our website at www.events.fip.org. Please do not hesitate at all to use the question box to ask questions. One of the panelists or myself will try to address them as time goes along, but we will also have time toward the end of this program that's scheduled for 90 minutes to be able to answer your questions as well. You're welcome to provide feedback to webinars@fip.org, and you have the web address there to become an FIP member if you are not already. I will add one more announcement to this, as I've done a few of these FIP webinars, and we usually get asked if you are going to receive a certificate toward the end, and that is automatically done. So that will be taken care of with no problem, and there's no need to do anything else on your part for that to happen. Next. So again, today's program is called Motivating Language, Special Considerations for Mentoring Among Diverse Groups of Colleagues, particularly whether your mentor or your mentee is someone who looks like you or perhaps is different from you ethnically, religiously, by age, gender, or what have you. We're going to have as our speakers Dr. Brooke Clubbs, Dr. Effie Mansurani, and Professor Heiko Spad. Next. We're going to reflect on motivating language to evoke more effective communication between mentors, mentees, and all of colleagues. We're going to draw upon something called social provisions theory, something that you might not be as fully aware of as perhaps motivating language, to evoke more effective communication between mentors, mentees, and all colleagues. We're going to demonstrate how communication using these strategies helps to promote or engender organizational and professional commitment, as well as mitigate burnout in pharmacy and really elsewhere. We're going to demonstrate how communication using these strategies helps to promote gender and racial equity and increase comfort levels of mentors and mentees who are varied in their backgrounds, as I just mentioned to you a moment ago. Next slide. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Brooke Clubbs. And she is going to talk about specifically on motivating language and social provisions theories. Beyond what you see there, I've been knowing Brooke for a few years. She is a communication specialist. We're so delighted to have her here in pharmacy. I'm always delighted personally when we have someone outside of pharmacy to share their expertise. And Brooke is such a tremendous communication specialist as well as a qualitative research specialist, as I've been knowing her for a few years in that regard. She is assistant professor and program coordinator for the MA program in higher education at Southeast Missouri State University in the US. She completed her MS in health communication at the University of Illinois and her EDD in educational leadership at the University of Missouri. Her dissertation was on faculty burnout and its relationships to social and institutional support. Her other research interests include social and emotional learning, mindfulness, and wellness in higher education. She is quite the interdisciplinary collaborator, as she has researchers in the field of neonatal care, and I can tell you that she is a frequent collaborator with some of us in pharmacy, having published several papers in the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education and in other journals as well. And so again, it's my delight to actually turn the program over to Dr. Clubbs.
Thank you so much, Shane. I really appreciate that. One thing I would point out is that this is an example of mentorship right here, me being able to be here and talking to all of you today. When I was working on my dissertation, I wrote to Shane to request permission to use his multidimensional work satisfaction scale that he had developed with one of his colleagues for my dissertation. And after I had defended, I sent it to him to say, look, here it is, it's done. Thanks for giving me access to your scale for free, because not all researchers did that. And then he said, talk about one of the greatest compliments you can get. Someone actually reads your dissertation, and he asked me to start collaborating with him on some different projects. And so there's a great example of how mentorship can take many forms, and you can end up with some very strange bedfellows. I never imagined myself writing and being published in pharmacy academia, but here I am. So I'm coming to you from Southeast Missouri. It is in the US, it's in the Midwest. It's 6 a.m. where I am. We had thunderstorms and tornado warnings last night. So just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. I am the program coordinator for our higher education administration master's program at Southeast. But for 15 years, I taught communication studies before moving into my current role. And so that is where my interest in today's topic sprang from, but it's very relevant to my current position as well, as I'm training future student affairs professionals. So today what we're going to be talking about first is I'm going to give you an overview of burnout. And then we're going to talk about social provisions. As Shane mentioned, that might be a concept that is newer for some. And we're going to talk about how social provisions can mitigate burnout. Then we'll look at motivating language associated with these social provisions. And then I'm going to give you an example of this in practice with the concept of organic interstage feminist mentoring. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to reference not only some seminal works from other researchers, but also some original research, including my dissertation, but also some work that I have done with Shane and Patty Darbyshire from Purdue. And this has been published in the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education. This is some qualitative research on communication in pharmacy higher education. And then also an upcoming chapter in a book that will be coming out with Lexington Press on feminist mentoring in academia that I was a part of on the concept of organic interstage feminist mentoring. I love it that I can see hearts floating up. It was wonderful to feel the love early in the morning. Thank you. So starting out, some of you may be familiar with the concept of burnout. It really is a term that can get overused. People will say they are burned out. Oh, I ate chicken, 4 times last week. I'm so burned out on chicken. Or I've been using this dating app and I haven't really, made any good matches. I'm getting really burned out on dating apps. And that's not actually the clinical definition of burnout. You're tired of those things. You've had enough of those things. You're frustrated with those things. Burnout is actually a syndrome that refers specifically to a feeling in the occupational context. And so it really shouldn't be applied to other experiences in life. We know people do that with lots of different types of illnesses. People like things organized and they say they're OCD. But if you're burned out, we're going to talk about what that specifically means. But one thing I want to point out is that it's not like depression, other mental illnesses that pervade every aspect of your life. If you're depressed, you are, depressed at your kid's soccer game, you're depressed, watching TV, it's every aspect of your life. Whereas burnout is a problem that is specific to the work environment. And the term burnout was first coined back in 1977. So just a year after I was born. Burnout is almost as old as I am. This psychologist noticed his patients' cigarettes would burn, the ash would get really, really long, and then the cigarette would go out while they were in session with him. And he began to relate that to his own personal feelings. Dr. Freudenberger felt that he was experiencing this growing length of, I'm going without really anything to fuel me, and eventually I'm going to burn out. So Christina Maslock and her colleagues are the ones who really looked at the dimensions of burnout to be able to measure it. Where Dr. Freudenberger described as a feeling, called himself a burnout case. Christina and her colleagues said, okay, let's look at what are the characteristics of this type of feeling that is associated with work. And one thing that I really want to stress is that she and her colleagues postulated that the best and most idealistic workers experience burnout. She said, you have to have been on fire to burn out. So a lot of times people who are experiencing burnout really feel that it's their fault, that it's some sort of personal weakness, that they need to just buck up, that maybe they're just not cut out for their position. Maybe actually they've chosen the wrong field. And I would want to, really stress this idea that you don't burn out if you don't really care a lot about what you're doing. And so frequently with burnout, you're putting so much into it, and it's that feeling of not getting the return on your investment. When it comes to burnout in higher education, over 15 years ago, there was a study that was done. And I like to think about how 15 years ago, people were still getting tenure and sabbaticals in the United States. I don't know how it is all over the world, but higher education in the United States is really struggling. We've put the onus on our students' tuition more than having it covered through the state governments. Originally, public institutions were financed, the majority of it was coming from the state. Now the majority of tuition is paid for by our students. And so we're always in this effort to provide more with less. And so faculty and staff are always facing, issues of budget constraints. So 15 years ago, when we were still getting more money from the states and people were, we had more tenured faculty, people could take sabbaticals, there was still already this concern of burnout for faculty. So here's that definition. Here's how we measure burnout. It's characterized by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a lack of feelings of personal accomplishment. So emotional exhaustion is this feeling when you're getting up, you're getting ready to go to work, and you already feel worn out. And after work, you feel completely used up. You just are not experiencing the energy that you once had getting ready to go to work, or that feeling of satisfaction when you're leaving work. Depersonalization is a sort of protective factor that especially people in helping professions like healthcare and education sometimes experience as a way to protect themselves. They will distance themselves from the people that they serve. So feelings of depersonalization could be described as, I don't really care what happens to the people I serve. I'm not really, I'm kind of looking at them as objects. And that sounds really cruel when I say it. And I should point out, it's one of the least common, like your burnout gets pretty severe when you are also experiencing this depersonalization. But again, it's that protective factor. When your compassion has sort of been depleted, you kind of put down that wall of not really connecting with folks. And then a lack of feeling of accomplishment. So the way that you might describe this is, I don't really feel like I've done anything worthwhile. I don't feel like what I do makes a difference. And so you can see how this is different from other types of mental health issues where it's pervading every aspect. There's the depression, there's anxiety. With this, it's so specific to work, this feeling that, oh, I'm just so tired thinking about going to work. I just don't have any energy for it. I'm not caring for the people that I'm working for or working with. And I just don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything. And so naturally, when people start to feel this way, they are either going to become very ineffective, or they're going to leave. Sometimes they'll look for greener pastures and they'll stay in the same discipline. They'll continue to be a teacher, they'll continue to be a healthcare worker, but they'll try going someplace else. But sometimes they just leave their profession entirely and feel like they need to try something new. So one of the things that we're going to look at in terms of mitigating burnout is this idea of social provisions. And so this was first characterized as 6 categories of ways to provide social support. The most basic definition of social support is people helping people. And a lot of times social support is characterized as instrumental. Someone's having a rough day, so you bring them a cup of coffee, or it's emotional. You're somebody's shoulder to lean on, or it's informational. Someone is struggling with a decision, so perhaps you provide information about when you had to make that decision. These categories really focus on that emotional area of social support. So there's attachment, social integration, an opportunity for nurturance, reassurance of worth, a sense of reliable alliance, and the obtaining of guidance. Those were specific types of emotional social support. And then these provisions were figured out a way to be measured in the social provision scale. And so they took out nurturance because that specifically focused on taking care of a child. And so the social provision scale wants to look a little bit more at relationships you could have with colleagues as well. And so we're looking at reliable alliance, practical help, guidance, that informational support, attachment, that emotional support, social integration, that feeling of belonging to a group of similar peers. Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have a definite need for belonging. And then reassurance of worth, which is a type of esteem support. So when they designed this scale, they used 10 items to tap into these 6 provisions that might be available from your general social network. So when I did my dissertation, I looked at this in terms of university faculty, and I measured university faculty burnout, and then I also then interviewed the people who were in the least burned out college within my university to see what was going on that was mitigating their burnout. I should point out that everyone at my university is burned out. There was no college that was like, we're good, there's no burnout here. I chose the lowest burnout score. They were still burned out. They were just the least burned out. And when I then interviewed people that were working in that college, I was trying to figure out what social provisions might have been mitigating their burnout. Why were they the least burned out college? And so the social provisions that were associated with this mitigation most strongly were guidance, particularly colleague guidance, guidance from their department chair, and guidance from upper administration. So all universities in the US have different hierarchies, but typically you've got sort of a board of folks who do not work at the university. They don't work for the university. They're like community pillars. And then you have the university president, and then you have your sort of academic executive officer, which is the provost. The provost is in charge of deans of different colleges. Like at my university, our colleges include education, health, and human studies is one. Humanities and social sciences is another. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is another. So there's all of these different colleges. And then within those colleges, we further subdivide into these different departments. So just to give you an idea of the type of hierarchy I'm talking about, people were saying they got guidance from their most immediate supervisor and then on up, but also there was horizontal rather than vertical guidance. There was guidance happening with their colleagues as well. And so one of the quotes I have here was that they received guidance on how to fill out their merit form and what to include, and help them think of things. And this is a document that you turn in to make the case for getting. Some folks, it's for promotion and tenure. And at my institution, we also have non-tenure track folks that go up for merit every 5 years, and it's in order to move up on the pay scale. And so they were talking specifically about getting that information from a colleague who had been there before, and so they could provide, you know, that information for them. Next was reassurance of worth, with the subcategories, again, of their colleagues, their department chair, and upper administration providing this reassurance of worth. And so again, this is that esteem, making you feel valued. And so one of the participants commented that their department chair made a deliberate effort to make sure that she checked in with people, made them feel appreciated for things that they do, because they were saying that there's all this invisible work that you do, you know, and so it's not just the grants, it's not just the publications, there's all of this invisible work that you do in higher ed with advising and grading. And so having someone notice and appreciate that was associated with mitigating burnout. So the way that motivating language plays into all of this is that there are different types of motivating language associated with different types of provisions. And so Mayfield, and Cope talked about this scale that measures direction giving, meaning making, and empathetic language. Direction giving is used to reduce uncertainty about tasks. You know, it's that direction. Here's exactly how you do something. Meaning making reduces uncertainty about organizational policies and practices. It includes things like saying, like, here's what someone who's been successful in our department has done. Here is a cautionary tale about someone who wasn't successful, and here's what they did. And then empathetic language helps establish relationships, and it reduces that relational uncertainty. So people sort of feel like they know where they stand with folks. And so in the study that I did with Shane and Patty, we talked with different pharmacy faculty, and we found that direction giving was associated with that social provision of guidance. And similarly to my study in my dissertation, people talked about it being so helpful with professional development and tenure. You know, just being really direct. You're going to need to have this many publications. You're going to need to have secured this much grant money. And then meaning making and reassurance of worth in the form of reinforcing roles. So that meaning making language really helped with that esteem, saying, I'd like you to participate in this study that I'm doing. And it wasn't just like saying, can I pick your brain for a second? It was actually saying, you know, I'd like you to be a co-author. I'd like you to, you know, be on this dissertation committee, and then, you know, providing praise. Sometimes there's not monetary rewards, but putting things, you know, out for recognition in newsletters and university publications, that all helped people feel like they knew what they, you know, that they were valued within their organization. And so all of our interviewees highlighted the importance of empathetic but also practical language, and that they didn't have to beg for it. It was supervisor initiated, and that it was really helping them to understand things versus generic platitudes like, everybody's doing a great job. Thank you for all you do. We value your contributions. It was really specific to the things that they were doing. I just saw someone in the chat mention something about the logic behind how social provisions and meaning and the motivating language, this is all sort of building on each other. So you know, we found that, you know, social support can mitigate burnout. Different types of social provisions characterize social support, and so we are zeroing in on which of those provisions mitigates burnout in this particular population. And then we're looking at the type of language that's associated with those particular provisions. And so we're just trying to drill down to the most specific ways that we can provide that social support to mitigate that burnout. All right. So one of the things that, when we drill down to, we realize that our colleagues are a very specific kind of friend. We might have a lot of, we might not think of our colleagues as being our best friends. They're not the people maybe that we go out with on the weekends, or, we go over to their house for parties or things, but yet they're a very specific kind of friend because they understand all of the context of what we are experiencing. I think about, if I try to explain an issue at work, well, first I have to explain the hierarchy, and then I have to explain the history of this particular person and why they have this particular issue with this other colleague. And then I have to explain these processes. If I'm talking with a colleague, they can understand immediately what I mean when I say something like, Sam forgot to make the attributes for my class high flex and blended for next semester. They know exactly what I mean, because they're living in that world too, and they can understand the frustration that comes with stuff like that. Whereas, it would take so much more explanation, and your friend would really rather be watching the game or getting another beer than going through all this minutia that's associated with your profession. And so Mark Granovetter talks about social networking theory, that, we need to have strong ties, our close friends, the members of our inner circle, our family, but we also need weak ties, acquaintanceships, so that we can experience stability, loyalty, and comfort. And it also helps us not have an isolated and insular perspective on the world. So we don't want our only friends to be the people that we work with. It's really good to, get that perspective, so we're not just solely in academia. I've heard people say their advice to graduate students is make sure you have hobbies, make sure you have other interests, because if all of your interests revolve around academia, that's really not healthy for you. But to recognize it is important to have ties with some colleagues, because then you can get that type of social support from them that can mitigate burnout. And so drilling down further, mentoring is a great way to get this type of social support. It's vital to providing guidance and reassurance of worth. Having someone who is in your corner, is rooting for you, and is also providing information for you. Sometimes we have formal mentors. We have folks who are assigned to us in our position. But what I'm specifically focusing on today is this organic mentorship that it just happens, kind of like me emailing Shane. I also experienced this with a group of colleagues from the National Communication Association. We met during a panel. Some of us were in the audience, some of the people were presenting, and we really just felt like this connection. And so we started to communicate with each other. And then once we started having these text conversations, it became Zoom conversations, working on papers together and supporting each other, because we realized we had some similar experiences in the academy. And so when we say feminist, it doesn't necessarily mean it would even all have to be women, although the women, I did write this chapter with all women. They're not necessarily feminist principles that are forced by the institution, but they're established through organic connections between scholars at various stages in their academic careers. So the organic is nobody assigned us to be mentors to each other. The interstage aspect is that some people might be graduate students, there might be early career faculty, there might be tenured faculty, that there are benefits to a tenured faculty member having a mentor who is, younger than them, who is, in the coming up kinds of stages, maybe to help them with technology or to offer different perspectives. And so and then the aspect of feminist is that it's people who focus upon and advocate the rights and needs of women with an understanding of the complex intersections of their diverse characteristics and life circumstances. Something I talk about with this group of women is Joan Acker's concept of the ideal worker. That the ideal worker was originally conceived as a man who had domestic support at home and could devote themselves completely to work. And so, with this feminist consideration, we're realizing like the need for work-life balance, that we, man or woman, usually both people are working and we don't have domestic help. And so accommodating for that. So it fosters these conditions for us to expand our networks and increase the chance of the group's younger members acquiring employment. So the folks who are graduate students in this instance. And it also tries to explain how we foster relationships to combat some of the toxicity that is very common in academia. So having these connections, having these mentors who are younger and older than us can really facilitate that. I'm sort of in the middle of my group of organic interstage feminist mentoring. And I know there was someone who, even though she's younger than me, she actually, I hate to say this, she recently passed away. She was younger than me, but she was much more accomplished in terms of publishing, in terms of where she was on the career ladder. But she would call me sometimes just to talk through situations she was having with her colleagues at the university. And I was always surprised she wanted my advice, but I realized she kind of felt like I was a big sister in a way, and able to, I had, more worldly experience with dealing with people. And so, that really, again, that reassurance of worth that I had things to contribute. So I really want to, when we think about all of these things, zeroing in, if you can find peers who share research interests, have similar career goals, that's really, what's integral to this concept of organic interstage feminist mentoring. And then having that consistent communication. These women and I are in all different parts of the country. So it is, mediated communication, Zoom, text, FaceTime, on the phone. But then it provides professional and personal support, that guidance and that reassurance of worth that we might not actually be getting in formal mentorships or at our places of employment. And so one of the quotes from our research was that, people saying like, sometimes you get a text and say, hey, this opportunity landed on my desk. I want us to work together on it. But it's also little check-ins, just like getting a text, like, how's everybody doing? How did your presentation go? How's that revise and resubmit going? And it just reminds you that there are people who are invested in your work and they want to help you accomplish your goals, because academia can be lonely sometimes. And so having those folks who have your best interest at heart can make a big difference. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn things back over to Shane, but I look forward to talking with folks during the Q&A.
Thank you, Brooke, so much. That was, I knew it was going to be edifying, and it was. It's so fascinating to hear how people can help each other in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And the two have a greater linkage than sometimes we might think. Our next speaker is Dr. Effie Montserrani. I've been knowing Effie for a few years as well. She's absolutely incredible. She began, her training and the beginnings of her career were more so in the areas of basic science, of bench science. And she has been able to shift her interests, as we often do in academia and in the professional world, to become more concentrated on her interest in things like reflection. She is very productive in that regard. She's interested in reflective practice and how that contributes to professional development. She's been seconded to the Royal I always have trouble pronouncing that word because I know Americans say it a little bit different than the Brits do. She's been with the Royal Pharmaceutical Society to support workforce development. She worked with me and others to really help to evaluate an entire mentoring program that exists nationwide across the entire UK. Some of whom are going to actually speak to us in the third session. So she's published in this area of reflection, mentoring, and is passionate about creating evidence for informing practice. And I'm just delighted that she's here with us today. So Dr. Mansurani, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Shane, and welcome everyone. I hope you have enjoyed the seminar so far. My talk, especially the first part of it, really follows up very, very nicely from Brooke's talk, and is all about interstage organic mentoring. And we're talking about language. So in our first event for the series about a month ago, there was a question from a participant. They asked, can mentoring work when someone wants to change sectors in pharmacy? And for those of you who have done this in their career, you will know it poses particular challenges. So my talk today will show you that, yes, it really can. And for this, I'll briefly talk through my professional journey to date. I'd like to share my experience with you and share how a range of mentors supported me along the way with some very, very specific language. So I completed my pharmacy degree in my home country, Greece. And in Greece, this is a 5-year integrated degree. So no additional pre-registration or practice year was required when I moved country. And after that, I came to the UK and completed a master's degree in science, chemistry-based degree, and then went back to Greece to start my PhD, again in a chemistry-based field. Towards the last year, I came back to the UK to complete the last set of experiments using the collaborations I had developed during my master's. And one of them has been my mentor ever since. So far we have Greece to UK, UK to Greece, and Greece to UK again. And I ended up in a lovely city called Cardiff in Wales in the UK. Decided to stay and work as a community pharmacist after my PhD. Bear in mind, never had any practice in the UK as a pharmacist. 4 years after, a position was advertised in the university here, and I decided to apply, was successful, and found myself in a completely new setting again, with roles that involved research and education, with me having had no background in education at all. And also the department I was in was more allied to research in pharmacy practice rather than medicinal chemistry, which had been my field up to that point. My practice background was extremely useful in bringing all the teaching to life. So in 6 years into the job, I decided to get some experience from hospital as well. So I went part-time in university and started working once a week in hospital, so I can experience that environment too. And a year after that, with enough experience so I can contextualize my teaching in that sector, I swapped that part-time role with a part-time role in research in the National Health Service in the UK. So if you consider the whole journey, in addition to changing countries and roles, ending up with a portfolio career, I changed sectors in my pharmacy career and areas in my research career. And I only really managed that because of the mentors I had along the way and still have. I've included here in this slide an image of cogs because to my mind, each and every one of these people, my mentors, was a cog. And all the cogs together made the process work, helped me be today where I am. I couldn't have done it without that. They helped me manage my confidence to move across roles, identified the right professional development for me to be able to respond to the new roles. For example, they encouraged me to attend leadership courses, education courses, and also even within the same role, they encouraged me to apply for promotion at certain times. And they really helped me network, which Brooke has been talking about as well. And all of these happened in a completely informal structure. So linking again to Brooke's slides, all of this has been an organic form of mentoring. It just happened. And you will see that it is interstage as well. I could talk about my mentors for hours, but I'll focus on some of the wording they have used, since the focus of this event is language. And I will share with you some examples that I have tried to remember for this session. This is one of the most useful phrases one of my mentors in my current place, one of my current places of work, has used and is still using. I am quite an enthusiastic person, and sometimes I just want to jump into a new project, a new idea, or on the other side of the coin, I get frustrated easily and I start thinking about giving up on a project. So my mentor always tells me to take a step back and look at the bigger picture together. So it prompts me to remember my long-term goals and how what I do aligns with them. The same mentor has another favorite phrase that I find particularly useful. What can I do and what can you do to make this happen? This phrase makes me think about what specific actions I can take to make something happen. What can I do? And also really carefully about where I can ask for help. We did mention in the first series that this is all about being prepared for meetings and for interactions with mentors, because everyone's time is limited. So making the most of the time people around you are willing to invest on you is key. This is from a different mentor in my other current role. When discussing potential projects, he always seems to know who to signpost me to. Someone with similar interests, so I can build my network. And equally, when we go anywhere together, in a work relationship, in a conference or something like that, an event, they are always introducing me to others with similar key interests. So they really, really have helped me build my network. This is from a mentor outside of work completely. We always catch up together for New Year drinks, end up having a lot of informal chats during these conversations. And at the end of one of these conversations, I discussed that's a few years ago, that I wouldn't mind trying to get some work in hospital so I can see how hospital pharmacy works. But I was quite scared. And she was really, really encouraging. And when I noted that I'm not sure I could do it, there was no prior experience in my CV. So who would hire me really? Her response was, of course you can do it. So between the prompting me to think carefully about what I can achieve in the year and encouraging me to do it, it really supported me to make a leap. And then when I started at the hospital, one of the pharmacists there was one of my ex-students in university for whom I had been a tutor during the course. And our relationship had turned into mentoring once he graduated. And as an example here of how the role switched and of the language he had come to learn from his mentee journey, this is how he introduced me to the team. What he wanted to do is to build my confidence, to show my value to the team by giving me small tasks I could already do, so I can get over my fear and I can just integrate into the environment. And this is a quote from a colleague who probably doesn't even consider himself as a mentor to me, but they are. And this phrase really showcases it for me. Always encouraging me and making me realize that I should stop worrying about not being able to cope with a task I have already committed to. His attitude, and that's a really good attitude to have actually with your mentees, is that if at some point I thought I was good enough to do something, then I am good enough and I should just give it a go. Nobody's perfect. And this is a quote from a mentor who supported me in an educational course to submit to get my senior fellowship, to develop my teaching role. And once the results were out, and of course I informed her that I completed the qualification, and I really thank her for her support. What she said was, I can't take any credit, it's all you, making me feel that I really deserved it, and hence reinforcing my value, again, building my confidence for the future. And the last quote for today. For those of you that were part of our first event, we did discuss that the role of the mentor is not really to rescue. It's rather to provide the tools so the mentee can develop and start rescuing themselves. So yes, we said don't rescue, but there's always an exception that reinforces the rule, isn't it? There are situations when rescuing is exactly what is needed. And for me, that was evident when I had some personal circumstances last year. My family, my father passed away, and I just couldn't function at the start. My mentor jumped in to save me, and I will be forever grateful for that. She asked me straight, what is that you need from me? What is it? And that really helped me because it gave me the validation I needed, that it is okay to just let go for a while. All of this experience, as you can imagine, with my mentors, shared my passion for mentoring and for research in mentoring. So a few years ago, Shane, some other colleagues, and I undertook an evaluation of a nationwide program for pharmacists, which was administered by the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the UK. This is our professional pharmacy organisation. And as part of this, I interviewed 20 pharmacists, and one of the areas we looked into in the analysis was the experiences of mentors and mentees, specifically when looking at the nature of their relationship. And from a personal perspective, I was really curious to see, would my experiences with mentoring and everything we have mentioned so far about whole life mentoring be replicated across a wider range of pharmacists? And these are two of the overarching themes that were constructed from our analysis. And I will talk to you about some key points from these, but essentially, yes, these experiences were replicated. In terms of their role, mentors perceived that they play a really important role in inspiring mentees and shaping their future attitudes and behavior. They described a facilitation approach where they assisted their mentee in making decisions and helping them focus through a process of listening, questioning, and discussion. They felt it was not their role to tell those who were supporting, but to reassure and encourage, helping others to explore options and to take the most appropriate action for them. And this helped to build and instill confidence in mentees, inspiring them to find solutions to problems and issues. The mentee participants also acknowledged their own role in this relationship. They really did understand that it was them, they should drive the relationship so that mentors can support appropriately. They valued having their thoughts and beliefs challenged by mentors, and they valued being exposed to perspectives that they would not have thought of by themselves. And individuals described different approaches to mentoring, which appear to be associated with, firstly, their prior experience, and secondly, their personal preferences. Some mentors seem to prefer a structured approach where expectations were clarified during the initial stages of the relationship. And these individuals set goals with agreed timelines and followed up on progress and actions at subsequent meetings. The mentors who used this approach felt that this was really effective in motivating individuals to complete all the necessary tasks. Other mentors applied a much more flexible approach, adapting their style to the needs and preferences of their mentees, but also adapting to the presenting situation or mentoring need. And they really talked about one size does not fit all. And we can see here a lovely quote from one mentor that encapsulates how mentoring is for the benefit of the mentees. And in their opinion, it was not appropriate to forcefully push for actions. And again, as we talked about in our first event, mentorship was perceived as a two-way relationship. It fulfilled the gaps and connected both members of the relationship emotionally. Participants who were mentors felt it was important to build strong relationships with their mentees and to build trust. And that was equally important for mentees as well. They really appreciated having someone listening to them in a dedicated session where they felt comfortable to talk about. Everybody talked about development of others and how it was really rewarding to contribute to that and to give back to the profession. And mentoring appeared to prompt self-reflection to mentors, and as such, further mentoring. Participants reflected constantly on their limitations as a mentor and tried to help them in other ways. And being involved in mentoring reinforced their own mentoring skills, made them better mentors. But some mentors went even further than that. They reflected that this process of constantly shaping the way they review their own practice enabled them to become not only better mentors, but better professionals as a whole. And the last theme, it was strongly believed that mentoring contributed to a change in individuals' behavior and belief in the mentee's ability. Many mentors talked about how they had observed an increase in confidence of their mentees during the discussions, and professional development, career development. And this was actually reinforced by a mentee who said themselves that even with a limited number of sessions, they felt their confidence in delivering in the new role had increased. So what have we seen so far? If you think about my personal experiences, we can see that this research really supplements that. And we can see that mentoring really, really does work. And there are specific approaches and specific motivational language that is conducive to effective mentoring. So with this in mind, I would like to finish off by asking you to take 5 minutes after the end of this webinar to think back to your career so far and times where you have been mentored and times where you have acted as a mentor. And respectively, when you acted as a mentee, can you think of some key phrases that your mentor used that really made a difference? And as a mentor, how well do you think you have used these phrases in your role? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mansurani. It's always a pleasure listening to you and of course working with you. And I recognize one of those quotes. I think we'll have to talk about that a little bit. Last but definitely not least, I sent an email out to a number of people that I know on the editorial board and others. I said, I'm looking for a speaker who is renowned in mentoring people, who has mentored people for many years, diverse sets of colleagues from different disciplines, different genders, races, ethnicities, and someone who is just very well-rounded. And I got an email back that said, oh, you have to contact this person. His name is Professor Heiko Spilek, and he's over at our university in Sydney, and he's head of the head of school over in dentistry. He is just fantastic. So I contacted Dr. Spilek, and he has been nothing short of that. Just the ultimate professional in terms of working with me and preparing for this presentation. And I can just, even though he hasn't mentored me yet personally, and I hope maybe that someday he does, I can tell that he's an expert at this. Dr. Spilek has really trained and has been around the world, including a number of places in the United States, at the University of Pittsburgh, which is just a couple of miles down the road where I'm from, where I was for a while at Duquesne University, as well as some activity in Humboldt State University, which is the northern part of California along the ocean. And we're just delighted to have Dr. Spilek here today. And I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thanks, Jane, for a nice introduction. Thanks for inviting me. This slide is really just to show off why we have always sunshine in Australia, while you have all the clouds which bring rain and storm, and as we've heard today, even tornadoes to some of our speakers. Most of you don't know me, so beyond what Jane said, maybe a small introduction is necessary to explain my New York accent. I was able to gain experience in a variety of roles in research-intense institutions on 3 continents and have an appreciation really for the complexities of research embedded in service delivery and health profession education. I also acknowledge the importance of research and education as the underpinning for excellence in sustainable service delivery. So in my particular case, I have advanced my dental knowledge by adding computer information science expertise that really allowed me to focus in my research on the intersection of dentistry and informatics. And so I have a really reckless disregard for boundaries of disciplines. I have also been appointed as the academic lead for digital health and health service informatics in the Faculty of Medicine and Health here at the University of Sydney, in addition to my role as head of school and dean. I also share, elected by my peers, the head of school committee at the University of Sydney, which represents 35 schools across the uni, when interacting with the executive of the university. Dentists are very conservative. They trust their peers. And while the slide is meant to be humorous, there's some truth in this, and it seems to apply when trying to spread the word about any kind of change. And that actually is a nice way into my reflections on communication that works. Here are my disclosure slides. You can read the details when you download the slides. When Jane asked me to present on leadership's lesson learned with a particular emphasis on successes and challenges when mentoring others using effective language. It took me surprisingly long to relate this to the 8 desiderata of successful leadership and mentoring that I often present on occasions like this. Then I read Checkins and Brooke's 2021 article, Communication in Pharmacy Higher Education to Improve Work-Life and Mitigate Burnout. And I really started to feel quite inadequate to present. I also read Shane's 2-part series on mentoring programs, design fundamentals of mentoring programs for pharmacy professionals. And that didn't make me feel better. He's a real expert and a true student of leadership. However, then upon reflection, having worked on 3 continents in academia gives me kind of a modest appreciation of the differences as well as the similarities in culture, language, and what works and what doesn't. So in the next 10-15 minutes, I will explain how I, based on my experience, see language being efficiently used in mentoring situations. But clearly much of this, if not all, also applies to leadership in general and relates to the desiderata for successful leadership. Here, due to time constraints, I will only focus on the first 4. So I will not talk about how to enable change, strategy, be smart. You're all pharmacists, you are smart anyhow, so don't have to go there. And also not about personal well-being and sleep. You can download the slides with all the web addresses and references that I will provide. So don't try to write them down individually. Just remember there's one link or use the QR code. And I will show this at the end again if you missed that now. So let's start with something very basic. Be nice. And everybody is busy, and it's not an excuse for not being polite in your behavior and your language. If you are rude to people, they will see this as an invitation to be rude. Shane and Brooke write in their article, language used by peers and administrators in higher education, specifically word choice, could affect optimism, while language deficits resulted in a greater incident of emotional exhaustion. I couldn't agree more. Even thanking staff for special activity needs to be done careful to not exclude someone. As head of school and dean, this is sometimes a challenge for me as I'm not across many of the details and need to rely on what I'm told about certain success stories when we celebrate these in our school. So how does this relate to mentoring and the use of language? If you're humble and grateful, your mentees will be humble and grateful. And if you're warm and engaging, your mentees will be warm and engaging. I tell my mentees to be more generous because generosity creates happiness. Guessing someone else's intentions in cases of conflict without having talked to them is a recipe for escalating conflict and ultimately failure. Many people don't know their own intentions, so how would you guess someone else's? I try to be present. Unfortunately, we overuse email as a communication channel, and email seems to have multiplied the rudeness of civil correspondence. One of the respondents in Shane's and Brooke's study said, I would rather have that opportunity to go to my boss's office and talk for 5 minutes instead of an email thread. That's something I'm struggling a lot with at the moment. Many of my staff are distributed in 3 main locations across Sydney, 16 kilometers apart. For the ones of you who still use non-metric units, that's about 10 miles. And they're mostly in clinic or in simulation clinic. And now after COVID, they work from home, if not rostered for either. So when I go to these locations and hot desk there, and I should also note that I don't have a fixed office, I always mix and mingle in activity-based workspaces or book a meeting room if I have a confidential conversation, of course. Nobody is there. And I recently introduced monthly staff breakfasts for before the clinic starts at each location to overcome these barriers. Seem to work quite well, and it's well appreciated. Not sure if it's because of the catered breakfast or something else, but I see a lot of engaging conversations there. I try to bring my attention and energy to the present moment. You can do this with mindfulness and other contemplative techniques. And except during the pandemic, of course, I always conducted mentoring meetings face-to-face, preferably in a cafe or lunch or breakfast or so, And I never would put my phone on the table, as I think that would signal that my attention is split. What do I do when I advise my mentees when they struggle and have made a mistake? It's important to change from feeling of resentment to resilience. I do not refer here to resentment directed against others, but against ourselves. We all tend to make mistakes because we're humans. I do my share for sure here. And then we generally think too much about these past mistakes and criticize ourselves. And then naturally we start worrying about the future. But how do we improve? Not by beating ourselves up about past mistakes or worries about the future, but by trying again and again. Every athlete and pianist will confirm that thinking about mistakes will not improve performance, but training and practice does. So we need to adopt this in our everyday lives. So cultivate humility. We all need to exhibit epistemic deference. Or to put it more simple, most people know more than you about most subjects. Humility is necessary for learning, and it's a virtue that acknowledges one's ignorance while being open to learn. I believe the phrase, "I don't know," is a sign of maturity. When I was a young man, I couldn't say those words. They were words of shame. Now I can't get through a day without using half a dozen times. I don't know. Power causes brain damage. You can see this actually in fMRIs, and if you're interested in this, here's a link to the article. But don't ask your boss for his fMRI. So how does this relate to mentoring and the use of language? Contrary to popular business wisdom, I don't believe there has to be a rigid line between our private lives and public lives. Old school said that views and expression of emotions and compassion can be seen as vulnerability. But I think today's generation sees this more as attributes, positive attributes, that is the glue that binds us. I try to make relationships to mentees at all levels stronger by sharing personal stories and experiences. Simple things can really make a difference there, like when meeting with students, letting them know that one of my daughters is in our Bachelor of Commerce program and the other one in the Bachelor of Psychology program. So I have insight into student life more than what you would expect from a head of school and dean. I tell my mentees that they must network if they want to succeed. Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone, is a little bit cheesy and geared towards business, but it clearly brings home many lessons that academics should embrace, but usually don't. Lastly, I share with my mentees what I call a purpose statement. It is derived from aspects that explain my own motivations and drivers, which then in turn will hopefully improve communication as they know where I'm coming from. This entails a few questions that I answer. For instance, what was a magical childhood moment? Who and what has influenced my career choices and leadership? What unique strengths do I bring to my career? What have I learned about myself from challenging life experiences? And maybe let me share here my answer to give you an idea how this can shape a future conversation. So my take on this is that life circumstances can suddenly change without warning and without any way to escape these changes. For me personally, this was the fall of the Berlin Wall as I grew up in East Germany. What are my core values? My take here is equitable access to healthcare, but really as part of equitable access to all opportunities that life offers. I did not have these until I was 23 years old, only saw on West German TV what's actually possible, like freedom of speech and so forth. What are my own limiting beliefs? I have limited tolerance for people who are self-centered and egoistic. That usually makes me more upset than it should, and I need to work on that. Then I explain my purpose statement, which is in my case, being ready to fight for equitable access to all opportunities that life offers in a changing world. And that usually improves communication afterwards. So be helpful. I try to model Adam Grant's undiscriminating helpfulness that actually reaps in professional benefits And if you don't know Adam Grant, you should read his book, which I put here on the slide. So how does that relate to mentoring and the use of language? Always try to be helpful. There's a lot of talking about it. You need to learn how to say no. I disagree. Does not mean you have to do everything. You can always connect requesters to people who are more suitable, maybe have more time. Sometimes you need to nudge people to collaborate, but a flat no really to request brings you nowhere. Reassurance was a topic that came up in Shane's and Brooke's article, and I have seen a lot of self-doubts among mentees, particularly female, and members of minority groups suffer from doubts and imposter syndrome. In my early days of mentoring, I was not sufficiently attuned to this issue and just objectively considered mentees' work and did usually not comment too much on the good progress, but focused on how can I give advice to tackle future challenges. The latter is probably objectively more helpful, but not emotionally reassuring. So I've changed here a lot. In my role as head of school and dean, I use many formal gestures of recognizing staff and students. For instance, during whole of school meetings, we actually have even a shout out app that everybody can use to send kudos to staff members and categories ranging from students first to courage to great to work with and so on. But we need to watch out that we don't convert these to become a popularity contest. Some of you might have read Dave Eggers' book, The Every. That's the follow-up story from The Circle, which made it into a movie with Tom Hanks and Emma Watson. If you are into giving lots of feedback, I highly recommend this book. So let's talk about resilience. Work is not wall-to-wall awesomeness, but your job as a leader and mentor is to answer the question, what am I doing to ensure that people enjoy working here? When in a good mood, people become more intuitive and more creative, as Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman has scientifically proven. The things you learn when you mature aren't simple things such as acquiring information and skills. You learn not to engage in self-destructive behavior. You learn not to burn up energy and anxiety. You discover that how to manage your tensions. You learn that self-pity and resentments are among the most toxic drugs. And you will find that the world loves talent, but pays off on character. You come to understand that most people are neither for you nor against you. They are thinking about themselves. You learn that no matter how hard you try to please, some people are not going to love you. A lesson that is probably first a little bit troubling, but then actually quite relaxing. Don't complain ever. A single complaint made by a leader can create a negative, unwritten ground rule that undermines an otherwise positive culture. I think at the moment in our society, there tends to be a general proclivity to be a criticizer rather than a doer, and to tear down rather than to build up. And I think we need to work against that in our role as mentors. So how does it relate to language? I've read in Shane's and Brooke's article that pharmacy practice faculty are prone to burnout due to mismatch of their training with key academic performance metrics. The same applies to all health profession academics, I think, or at least to dentistry, that's for sure. What do I do about this? I show empathy, that I understand being trained myself as a dentist and not primarily as an academic is challenging. I show career pathways that support the transition from health profession to academic researcher. And I point to other academics who are 5 to 10 years ahead of them and have made a successful transition. I also share with them not to neglect their families. My family comes first. Family is also a continuous responsibility. I'm a father, husband, son, 24/7, 365. And you also obviously have to take care of yourself. While they have to focus on their career advancement, I also advise my mentees that 10 to 20% of their work life will be spent on non-value added activities. standing meetings that may not be relevant to the area, but their presence and visibility reinforces their place. Such meetings may feel like an interruption to their ability to do creative work, but they need to convince themselves that investing 20% of their work time is required by the institution and will pay dividends over time. And there's no point in getting worked up about this each time. Lastly, I also have a point of disagreement with Shane. He writes in his mentoring program series quite a bit about that mentors and mentees should co-lead programs, seek opportunities to work together, give back, and also about reverse mentoring. And while Shane points to some dangers like treating a mentee as a possession and taking credit for the mentee's accomplishments, I would go a huge step further actually here. I'm adamantly against mentoring along reporting lines, even inside the same research group. That might not be a good idea in my view. I have doubts if all mentors are able to just give and be the dispassionate advisor the mentee is looking for. Maybe I'm also passionate about this because I'm a burnt child here, having been mentored to mostly benefit my mentor during part of my own career, and never had the guts to say no and escape that situation only very late, leaving the role I was in. Therefore, my advice to everyone is to select a mentor strictly outside the reporting lines, and best even from another school. Clearly, it should be someone similar, a few years ahead, and all that. But the moment the mentor has interest in the outcomes of the mentee's work, I see dangers there. Only 2 years ago, I've advised a female mentee to leave the university as I thought it was the right thing for her to do in her specific situation. Would I have done this if she had been in my own school? The simple answer is no, as it would have collided with the interest of the school I'm leading. So with that, let me finish, and I would like to thank all my collaborators. They have all the good ideas. I'm just collecting them. And last slide, here again, the link to the slides. And I also publish a weekly newsletter. Here's for my shameless plug for it. Well, it's free, so you only have to subscribe. So there's just sharing some of the insights I have gathered. Thank you very much, and I will hand back to Shane at this point.
Thank you, Heiko. Much appreciated. Oh, such wonderful words that you shared with us. I added a few comments to all of our participants today. And thank you all for joining us. I apologize myself for not being visible on the screen. I've had a rough couple of weeks. My camera's not working. I was in a terrible auto accident last week. I'm battling a very substantial respiratory cold this morning. And every appliance in my wife and I's home is broken in the last 6 or 7 days. But I'm heartened by everything that I heard this morning, and it reminded me that a few encouraging words from my colleagues over the last few days have actually helped to brighten these couple of weeks. Remember, this is a second in a series of presentations on mentors. We concentrated on language today. On May 2nd is our third of the fourth one. And there we're going to be talking about the responsibilities of leaders and creating a culture of mentorship, and those who are in charge of mentoring programs, what are their obligations in doing so? And our fourth presentation in June will actually feature people from FIP to talk about their possibilities for unveiling various mentoring platforms internationally throughout their mentorship in the world. I noticed in keeping in touch with the chat box and Q&A, there's only a couple of questions that I think are more administrative that maybe should be directed perhaps an email to people at FIP. And other than that, we are at the so-called witching hour at the end of our program. So again, I would like to thank you all. Again, remind you of the World Congress in Brisbane this fall with FIP, which I guaranteed is going to be an absolutely phenomenal event. And again, thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to FIP for hosting us in this digital event today. And thank you all for participating, and have a wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week.